we made a website to serve as an educational resource for middle school students or as a teaching tool for middle school teachers. For the website, in addition to describing the plants, we wanted to put specific emphasis on the connection of Hawaiian plants with Hawaiian culture. Here on the home page, we decided to put a prayer. Originally, the prayer was written by Kukui for the John A. Burns School of Medicine's garden. And while it is a modern prayer, we felt that it really communicated the Hawaiian practice of La'au very well. For those of you who don't know, La'au is essentially the Hawaiian traditional practice of healing that employed spiritualism in addition to medicinal plants. The practice is the central idea that we wanted to focus on our website. So, in the About section, we wanted students to have a solid foundation in the history of Hawaiian medicinal plants and its link to Hawaiians. To this end, we included the origins of Hawaiian medicinal plants, La'au, which essentially just serves as a description of the practice, and also the decline of it as a practice. So to go a little bit more depth, Hawaiian medicinal plants have basically two different origins. Either they were brought here by the Polynesians, or they were already present in the Hawaiian Islands. But if you want to take the more Hawaiian traditional approach to its origins, any Hawaiian medicinal plants are the kinolau of gods. So, for example, ki is associated with the god Kane. So, I previously described what La'au is, but to go in a little bit more depth, it was a medicinal practice that was practiced by the Lapau kahuna, which was basically just a subset of the kahuna, which was a caste in Hawaiian society that was tasked with specialized activities, which usually had some sort of spiritual aspect to it. So for many Hawaiian cultural practices, medicine and spiritualism were often one and the same. Any issues with health came down to a disruption of lukahi, the harmony of mind, body, and spirit. So to ensure that lukahi was maintained, if it was in disarray, for example, Lapau kahuna were tasked with carrying out ceremonies to the gods, which used plants, medicinal plants, in addition to prayer. Unfortunately, over time, faced with large population declines due to disease and an increasing Western influence and exploitation, in 1819 the copper system was abolished, and this really marked what would be the decline in Lapau practices and of Hawaiian traditional culture in general. And why this was significant, because its loss really resulted in the loss of sanctity of ideas, objects, and the social hierarchy that was central to Hawaiian practices. And really it also delegitimized and limited many Hawaiian practices. For example, during the period post copper system abolishment, many Hawaiians, or really all Hawaiians, were not permitted to worship Akua at heiaus, which really left a void in Hawaiian culture, religion, and really everyday life, which gradually over time got filled in by Western culture and religion. And with that came a struggle with the kahuna to maintain relevancy in Hawaiian everyday life. In particular, the kahuna lapao were particularly effective because Western standards of medicine did not view Hawaiian traditional medical practices as sufficient. Over time, they also began to have a little bit more of an obstacle to practice as Hawaii began to require medical licenses. Unfortunately, over time, much Hawaiian traditional knowledge regarding medicine was lost because it was often orally transmitted and largely kept secret. So to go into a little bit more in depth about the specific plants that they use for these practices, we decided to use bitter ginger, noni, and kukui. So for bitter ginger, it has multiple names, including pinecone ginger, shampoo ginger, wild ginger, and its Hawaiian name, Awapuhi Kuawi. It is thought to be native to India and Malaysia, and was one of the 24 plants the early Polynesians introduced to the Hawaiian islands in several voyages. So as a little bit more of a Hawaiian perspective, bitter ginger is a kinolau of the Akua Kane, so basically the embodiment of Kane. And this really reflects the view of the Hawaiians had of the medicinal value of bitter ginger, because a plant with divine associations usually held much power. And it's therefore fitting that it was used frequently in Lapao healing practices. So for uses, we focused on looking at specific parts of the plant and what it was used for. So for the inflorescences, it usually contains a surfactant, which was used by the Hawaiians as shampoo. The rhizomes of the plant were used to treat inflammation, pain, and parasite infections. However, modern investigations also suggest that rhizome extracts have strong antimicrobial properties, and was likely the most frequently used part of the bitter ginger for medicinal practices. And just as an aside, the leaves were sometimes used to flavor meat. Okay, so next is noni. So noni can be found on almost all of the main Hawaiian islands. It has adapted to both dry and moist open areas and forests. Noni is a canoe plant, which means that it was introduced here by the Hawaiians. So this really is what they are known for historically, and this ultimately influenced whether or not they would be chosen to be propagated on the new land that the Hawaiians settled on. So because it had its medicinal properties, that is one of the major reasons why noni was brought as a plant to the Hawaiian Islands. So noni is not endemic to Hawaii. It means it can be found in other places in the world. However, it is still considered a native Hawaiian plant, and the common name for noni is the Indian mulberry. So for medicinal uses, traditionally the bark and roots of the noni tree were used to colorize copper because of their yellow and red colors. Noni was viewed as a famine food because although it was edible, it was not palatable. There are many theories of what and how Native Hawaiians used the noni fruit and its medicinal properties, but like I said previously, lots of that knowledge has been lost, unfortunately. It is said to have been used for flus, viral infections, as well as bacteria infections, colds, severe lung conditions, etc. Also, the white fruit was used in the early days in its mashed form as a poultice for boils, cuts, and even fractures. It can also be used as a preventive medicine because it has immune boosting properties as well as healing present illness. One of the most significant properties of noni is that it is rich in immunomodulatory polysaccharide-rich substances, which means that it can help fight the growth of tumors and therefore fight cancer, as well as the phytochemical cells in noni, which can fight cancer cells directly. So as a brief description, noni is used in the modern times for its juices, which is fermented and pressed to be extracted. It is infamous for its potent smell and the fermentation process that comes with the characteristic. The fruit itself grows to be about a baseball in size, as a green fruit, and is ripens until it is a pale yellow color. It smells and tastes like sneaky cheese and was nicknamed the starvation or vomit fruit because it was the only thing to eat sometimes. If you have ever been around a noni tree, you usually can see the whitish yellow fruits that have began to rot underneath it, and you will really know what we're describing. So for this group member, they decided to show a little bit more about how noni juice is extracted. So first, noni is picked from the tree, usually when it's ripened to a pale whitish yellow color with a strong pungent cheese smell. Next, it is cleaned and left with skin on. After it is cleaned, it is placed in large or small jars depending on the harvest size or availability. Next, the jars are sealed tightly and placed in a warm place, usually in a windowsill or outside, to ensure a proper fermentation process. Over time, as the noni fruit sits, we start to sweat, and the medicinal juices ferment. You can begin to see the noni juice collect at the bottom of the jar within a few days to a week, and the longer you wait, the better in terms of the fermentation process. And finally, we have kukui, which you can see here. So as a brief introduction, the species is more commonly known to Hawaiians as the kukui, but is also known as Alerides mollucana. I hope I pronounced that right. And in English, it is known as the Candlenut Tree. Kukui was brought to Hawaii by Polynesian voyagers to the Hawaiian archipelago as a canoe plant, so really just like the other two plants I described. And after being introduced, it likely spread quickly alongside humans and remained a stable core crop for the Hawaiian people. Kukui was significant to the native Hawaiians for its ethnobotanical uses, both medicinal and non-medicinal, as well as its association with the pig god Kamakura. So as a description of its physical characteristics, it is a hardy and fast-growing species that can range from 30 to 50 feet in height. The flowers are white, small, has 5 petals, and grow in inflorescences at the ends of branches. The leaves have 3 lobes and are a silver green color. The fruit of the tree is green, contains the nut, which is protected by a hard husk. Traditionally, all parts of the tree were used for various medicinal and non-medicinal products. However, the parts of the tree that we use medicinally are the flowers, leaves, bark, and nuts. So in terms of its medicinal uses, it was used to treat a wide variety of common ailments. The flowers, for example, were used to treat oral sores, also known as thrush, and the leaves were used for sealing wounds and creating proteases. Don't know how to pronounce that. The nuts and the fruit were often used in conjunction with other plants and medicines and needed to be administered carefully, as they could create very potent medicines. Uses for the fruit or nut included constipation, ulcers, respiratory illness, high blood pressure, skin sores, and more. More recent research suggests that extracts from the bark and sap of the kukui tree might even have antiviral, antifungal, and antibacterial properties. However, one of the most common uses for kukui today is the use of its kukui oil to treat sunburns, which is a treatment that in modern times share with ancient Hawaii. So in addition to these plants, to supplement student knowledge, we made 3 worksheets with accompanying answer keys. So one of the worksheets was a guided research organization. So we wanted essentially for the students to create a project as a result of research. And really we wanted this because we want students to really ingrain this knowledge into their heads. And what better way than to have them research it themselves. And likely this is something a teacher would assign anyway. So supplement whatever lessons the teacher might have. Next, we created a crossword puzzle because, of course, we want the students to learn, but we want them to be motivated to learn as well. So we wanted to have some fun activities to help promote that. And here is the answer key. And similarly, we just wanted some more variety, so we also made a word search. So we could make sure that the students memorize these terms by constantly looking back and forth, which over time would cause them to retain those words, hopefully, and the accompanying answer key. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something.